there for a couple days and back to PA.
Sheesh. Oh, so you live in PA?
I live in PA, but I have an apartment in Manhattan, so I'm really splitting my time quite a bit these days.
Awesome. Live in PA?
I live in PA, but really.
Cool. All right, cool. We're good. All right, we are officially live. How is everyone here doing today? It is a beautiful Tuesday, and we are here with another edition of UnlockNJHomes Live. I am here today with Jim Cinelli, who is the president of Liberty Environmental. How's it going, Jim? Thanks for tuning in.
It's going great. Thanks very much for having me.
All right. I just want to start off with this. Keep it pretty simple. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit about you? You know, how long you've been in business?
Yeah, sure. Like you mentioned, I'm the president of Liberty Environmental. We're an environmental consulting firm with 3 offices in Pennsylvania and 1 in New York City. My partners and I co-founded the business back in 2004. So we're about 17 years old now. I myself am an environmental engineer, bachelor's from Lehigh University and a master's from Penn State University. Our company is a mix, though, of biologists, geologists, and environmental engineers.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Could you tell us a little bit more about Liberty Environmental and what areas you cover?
Yeah, environmental consulting firms basically help companies comply with environmental regulations. The easiest way for me to describe it is to take our clients and put them into 2 sectors. We do a lot of work for manufacturing, and then we do a lot of work for the real estate sector. Manufacturing has nothing to do with real estate at all. It's helping companies comply, particularly manufacturing firms, comply with all the different environmental regulations that they need to deal with. Air quality regulations, stormwater, wastewater, waste management. The other part of our business deals, like I said, with real estate, and that's where we get involved in real estate transactions or real estate redevelopment projects, where we evaluate real estate. It's almost always some kind of commercial real estate property. Every now and then we have a residential property, maybe with a leaking home heating oil tank issue, but I'd say 99% of our work is done on commercial properties. So our environmental specialists and our geologists go out and evaluate properties. They dig holes in the ground. They drill through the ground. They get samples. They get them analyzed at a laboratory. They determine if there's soil contamination. They may go out and do groundwater investigations, drilling wells, sampling. They'll do computer modeling. They'll do an analysis of what the potential impacts could be of any contamination that's found on a site. And if it gets to a point where we decide that remediation is necessary, we exceed any kind of cleanup levels that might apply, and these are cleanup levels that are imposed by either a state environmental agency or the federal EPA, or sometimes even local environmental agencies. At that point, when we decide that some kind of remediation needs to be done, it more or less gets shifted over to the engineer then. The engineer does an evaluation of what kind of remediation alternatives there are that would be applicable to a site, and then we go and oversee the cleanup of the site. So our projects are, like I said, are typically done for people buying or selling or redeveloping commercial real estate. Sometimes we're retained by their lenders, because most lenders, when they're lending on commercial real estate, all depending on what their internal policies are, need 3 things: a title report, an appraisal, and an environmental report. So our projects could be small $2,000 projects that get done in 2 or 3 weeks for a bank to facilitate a transaction, and they're that quick, if there's no contamination found, to large brownfield redevelopment projects that might be multi-million-dollar projects that last 10 years or even more to clean up.
Oh, wow, that's pretty incredible. So, I mean, obviously dealing with a commercial property is a lot different than dealing with a residential property. So, like you said, with residential, you're typically, whenever you're dealing with residential, you're typically dealing with like oil tank issues and, soil contamination from oil tank issues potentially. What are you typically looking for out of a commercial deal?
Well, if let's say it's an apartment building, let's say it's a multifamily property, residential property, then same thing. It's almost always a heating oil tank, a leak from an underground heating oil tank, or maybe like a bad spill from an above ground heating oil tank. It's seldom that you see something other than that on a residential property, at least a residential property that's been residential for a long time. So with commercial properties, you have anything from your small um, uh, gas station sites, dry cleaner sites. Dry cleaners historically have had a lot of problems with the chlorinated solvents that they used in the dry cleaning process. Unfortunately, that stuff, when it's spilled, gets through concrete, gets through the soil, and often impacts groundwater. To larger, like I mentioned before, large brownfield sites where there might be a history of 100 or more years of manufacturing, and then you get into a myriad of issues, chlorinated solvents, petroleum-based contamination, metals, and so the first part of environmental investigation is always phase one. That's why we do phase one environmental site assessments for banks. That's really just a visual assessment and then a look into the history of the property. And what that history shows, as we're looking at historical information like deeds and aerial photos and historical maps, will direct us to determine what the scope needs to be of a phase two. We get asked, every now and then, give me a cost estimate for a phase two, when we haven't even done the phase one, and it's kind of hard to tell them, well, a phase two could be, simply spending one day in the field, getting a few samples to the lab and zipping it up with a quick report. But that's all depending on what the phase one findings are. If we find, 2 or 5 or 50 different environmental issues on a large former industrial site, that phase two could easily get into 6 figures. So there's a myriad of different issues that could come up. Like I said, all based on prior use of the site for the most part.
Awesome. Very good information to know for sure. So, I mean, that means you are a very, very useful asset for any realtor looking on purchasing a property, or helping a client purchase a property, especially when they're looking on buying, a multi-level unit.
Yeah, we always try to emphasize to people that we meet in real estate, if they're whether they're a new or experienced investor, you got to know that environmental issues can really delay the process. We can do a phase one in a few weeks, but if we need to do a phase two, that's several more weeks. And if we identify contamination, then you're out there for more weeks or even months till we can provide at least a rough idea of what potential liabilities are there, what kind of cleanup liabilities are there, and we often we once we have enough data that we collect from the site, we put together a cost estimate, and we say low range, high range, from low to high, here's your range of excuse me, of potential cleanup costs, and hopefully that's going to facilitate the real estate transaction, but don't wait to call us a couple weeks before closing on a property when you have a gas station or a former manufacturing plant, and hope that everything's going to go well and there's going to be no findings in the phase one. It happens. It happens just because people are forgetting, or they just don't they don't have the experience to understand what kind of curveballs can be thrown at you when we find something that's an environmental concern on a property.
So, with all that being said, I gotta ask, what's the craziest job you've ever had to do?
Craziest job. Our work is mostly boring. It's There's nothing too sexy about it. Like people always, when I say environmental, they start talking about green buildings, and I say no. Unfortunately, that's the mechanical engineers and architects get to do all that, sexy, cool, green building type of design work. All of our stuff is ugly and underground. But we had a site where there was a relatively new underground gas tank, fiberglass gas tank, and there was an issue either with an improper installation or just unforeseen ground settlement, and one leaking tank, because there were people on wells just down gradient of the property, caused us to get into a 8 or maybe even 10-year cleanup process that cost $1.5 million. So one small tank can have an enormous impact. The bigger the sites, the more interesting they get. We're working now on a facility that's about 22 acres, and for 130 years it was paint and varnish manufacturing. So you can imagine, what kind of issues we have there. We have so many monitoring wells, and we're still investigating that. We're going to have to do active cleanup. I can't say off the top of my head that I've found anything that was completely out of left field. We've heard there's always rumors, especially old properties. There's not always rumors. Sometimes there are, like, we were investigating a filled quarry, and somebody said, oh, they put a fire truck in that quarry before they filled it. Well, we've investigated the heck out of that quarry, and we never found a fire truck. So sometimes the stories are more interesting than factual information.
Jeez, a fire truck. That's
and not to say that people haven't done that. Buried cars and trucks and whatever underground. We've found interesting stuff. We've when you think about it, think about environmental regulations really started to be developed and mature to what we know them today in the 1980s. That's not that long ago. So think of all that history, the 100-year history of industry and industrial activity, where there was there were some regulations, but nothing like we started to develop in the 80s. So there's 100 years of almost no holds barred manufacturing, and they a lot of times on these big sites didn't hesitate to bury stuff they couldn't find a place for somewhere else, or just dump stuff in the back 40. So at the beginning of a project, you cross your fingers and hope that this isn't one of those sites, but we run into a lot of them.
Wow, that's crazy. I did see an interview of yours on Berks County TV regarding endangered species. Have you personally encountered anything like that before? And if so, how was that resolved?
We do encounter those issues on projects. That's a very, very specialized practice. We have 3 biologists in our company that focus on wetlands and endangered species. Endangered species are that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of them across the United States, and but they're not all widespread. Mostly there's they're only in a certain habitat. You don't have endangered species in New Jersey that you have in Florida. But one of the big ones in Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey is the bog turtle. Thank you, boy. And the bog turtle is problematic for developers of greenfield sites. They live in wetlands, and so when our biologists identify habitat, they have to go out there and actually search for the turtles. They're literally out there 4 times, and that has to be between April 15th and June 15th, with a wooden stick searching for turtles. And if they're identified, you don't get a permit. in general to disturb those wetlands. There are times when you need to disturb a wetland to install a road or get access to a property, and state agencies will give you a waiver to disturb wetlands, and typically they want you to then mitigate wetlands and build new wetlands somewhere else. But you don't you don't construct a road through endangered species habitat, generally speaking. And in fact, there are times when you are required to have a 100 or even 300 foot offset of that endangered species habitat. So imagine what that does to a new project, whether it's a big warehouse project or a residential development. It can eat up a good part of the developable area on the property. So kind of like doing your phase 1 environmental site assessment, and with plenty of time, and especially with certain properties, think that it might go into phase 2 or even cleanup. If you're developing a greenfield site, do your wetlands and endangered species surveys well in advance of when you plan to spend a lot of money on site design, and of course even further advance of site construction, because they can really wreak havoc, those endangered species, on developers' plans.
I can only imagine that, for sure. And like you mentioned earlier today, a lot of these regulations just started becoming more, just becoming a lot more, in the 80s and everything. It's just like in our real estate and residential real estate as well. I hear the stories about all the old inspections when it comes to oil tanks and stuff like that, how the requirements have changed substantially from now and in comparison to where it was back maybe even just like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So I can only imagine how it's been with you.
Yeah, I mean, the regulations didn't just come out in the 80s and remain static. They're changing all the time. And a lot of that is because it's a relatively young field. We implement regulations, we work under those regulations, and then the agencies find that there's a need for improvement. So the way our biologists evaluate wetlands has changed significantly in the last few years, because the agencies nationwide, it's the Army Corps of Engineers, and then each state also has their own regulations that apply to wetlands. A few years ago, they changed the way that our biologists say, okay, what's the quality of this wetland? Is this a pristine, high quality wetland, or is it one that's been impaired by urban runoff? And that affects a lot of the development design work that's done by civil engineers and land planners. So the rules of the game are always changing. The toxicologists are always doing new studies, and sometimes our cleanup standards in soil or groundwater for one chemical or another could be lowered, so we have a more strict cleanup standard. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes those cleanup standards are raised, so it's a less stringent standard. And then there's new contaminants, PFAS, which are contaminants that are highly toxic and are very persistent. Really, we've just been evaluating those in the last few years, and states and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different PFAS compounds, and states are all individually developing their own cleanup standards, and deciding, if we find it on a site, okay, then what? So this is an ever-changing field. We are constantly needing to keep up with guidance and best practices and new regulations.
I do want to ask you something, because I know this is something that we kind of discussed a couple of weeks ago. This wasn't something that we were planning on discussing, but we met, actually, for those of you who don't know, Jim and I actually met at an ARIA event a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually about industrial cannabis and the farming aspect of that. How's that directly affecting you guys? Like, what kind of regulations are you guys doing, or practices do you guys do in order to ensure a smooth transaction when it comes to people looking on buying a marijuana farm?
That use really has nothing to do with what we do. Like I said, it's mostly about us looking at the history of the property when it comes to evaluating whether there's any kind of soil or groundwater contamination or not. Now, when it comes to the development of the site, like I said, rules are always changing, especially when it comes to endangered species and wetlands. But then again, that building is just like any other building, whether it's cannabis or food production or a metals manufacturing facility. One thing that that was a great panel to sit in on. I appreciated that opportunity. So we talked about cannabis, and we also talked about warehousing. Warehousing has exploded in the last 10 to 15 years. There are different trends. And one trend is to keep building bigger and bigger warehouses. I mean, 1.3 million was the new 1 million, and now they're doing 1.5 million square foot buildings. So, just think geographically, you've got a property, and there's always going to be some kind of stream or wetland on a greenfield property that you're going to develop. And it's a lot easier to wedge 500,000 square foot buildings in between the streams and wetlands than it is to, get a 1.5 million square foot building. So this trend for bigger and bigger warehouses is causing more work for us, and we're not complaining, of course, but it's a bigger permitting challenge. We're dealing with the regulatory agencies more, and we need to get involved more in the mitigation of the impacts of that development. There are just development trends like that impact what we do as scientists and engineers.
I've actually noticed an increase on buyers when it comes to warehouses as well, especially after COVID, because a lot of restaurant owners at that point were looking on transitioning to just doing distribution and everything. With that being said, how has COVID impacted your business?
Fortunately, we were minimally impacted by COVID. We noticed in when did we start? Boy, I wish it was a distant memory. March 2020. So March, April, May 2020, we saw proposal demand really, really drop. And following that was a slowdown in work in probably June, July, August last summer. And things seemed to start to pick up after we got kind of through the COVID hangover, and as last fall came, things started to pick up for us. 2020, our revenues were down about 7 or 8% compared to 2019, so that's not too bad. We'll take that. And then April of this year, we saw the floodgates open, and as I talked to other people in the environmental industry, they're kind of seeing the same thing. I'd say January through April. The 4 months after, the 4 middle months of the year, I think our revenues probably jumped up 30%, and we had to hire another scientist. We're a 30-person firm, so hiring one person means that we're really we're staying pretty busy. That's a big deal for us, hiring one person with our size. So and it seems like it's going to be sustained throughout at least the end of this year and into next spring. So. I think there was a lot of pent-up demand. Commercial real estate transactions just were put on hold, and then, like I said, sometime this past April, the floodgates open, and we're all very, very busy in our industry.
Nice. Now a little bit more of an environmental question. Mm-hmm. Do you believe in climate change, and how has climate change affected your business?
Yeah, climate change is happening. That's pretty clear. And I try to, as an environmental consultant, we're the go-between between the regulated community and the regulators. Okay, so we're not 100% impartial, but we try to be really, really open. And we try to understand the science, and we're not activists as environmental consultants, by and large. I think there's, the evidence shows there's global warming. The big question is how much of that global warming is anthropogenic, due to man-made activities, and how much is it due to the natural warming and cooling of the earth. And that's, I don't know that all scientists will ever agree on that. And because there is it's like predicting the weather. People joke that, I want to be a meteorologist. It's the only job you can have that you can be wrong 90% of the time. Predicting or evaluating global warming is even more difficult, more complex than predicting the weather a few days from now. But I definitely think there has been impact and climate change impact from man-made activities. But it's for those, that feel strongly one way or the other. I think that it's, do your best to understand the science and listen to the arguments coming from both ends of the table, because it's an argument that's worthy of having. Just imagine that we spend trillions and trillions of the Earth's of countries on the Earth's funds, and only to find that 20 years from now, boy, it was largely just from the Earth's natural cycle. We could have spent all that money on flood control and good old-fashioned dams and levees instead of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's what makes it an argument that's worth having, and why we should still continue to do more and more research and evaluate man-made impacts on our climate. But I do like, for many reasons, efforts that are being made today to increase energy efficiency and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Our company gets involved in doing energy efficiency surveys for commercial buildings. And I personally, in my office building, which I own, have been making efforts to reduce energy consumption. It's just smart policy, I feel.
We do got a question from the audience, from Corey Winter, asking, what kind of pushback do you receive when trying to construct or manufacture a new warehouse, especially in wetland areas?
The rules are pretty clear. There is what's a little difficult about our field is, we work in several states, and the rules do change from state to state, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's human nature. It seems like the rules change from one environmental reviewer in a regulatory agency to another. But wetland evaluation is somewhat established, how we identify wetlands and how we identify their functions and values. And then it comes down to a very much regulatory control of what you do then. How much are we allowed to disturb? How much do we have to mitigate? And what mitigation plan is reasonable. The regulatory agencies, I give them credit. They've got a rough job. In general, they're good to work with. They understand that development is necessary, but like I said, the bigger and bigger buildings are increasing the challenge because of the impacts that we have. I can't say that on the I'd say 7 or 8 large warehouse projects that we've worked on in the last 10 years, none of them have died. None of them have died because of wetland regulation. Some of them, like I said, because of their size, it took more time and more cost because it created a more complex mitigation project to mitigate the impacts. But so I don't, although that challenges are greater, I don't see wetlands issues as being deal killers. I will say that just recently, the Biden administration has made some change to the definition of wetland. It's convoluted, and I'm not going to go into it in detail here. But there was a a Supreme Court decision called Rapanos. I think it was Rapanos versus the U.S. several years ago, and there were two different opinions by judges, and the way it works is that either opinion could be used by the federal agencies, EPA and the Army Corps, in developing a definition of what's a regulated water, i.e. wetland. So Trump said, I'm going to use this Supreme Court judge's opinion, and we're going to develop the definition of a regulated water of the United States in this way. And then when Biden came in, he said, no, I'm going to use this Supreme Court judge's opinion as the basis of definition of what a regulated water of the United States is. So it's convoluted, like I said. I wish instead of using a Supreme Court decision and various opinions from that decision, we could just have a kind of a unified approach under a new water quality law. But those are hard to get proposed and then agreement on in Congress. So I think we're stuck with what we have now. Sorry if that went a little long, but these are interesting times when it comes to people dealing with streams and wetlands.
Hey, nothing wrong with giving these guys a little bit of extra couple of nuggets. So, well, guys, with that being said, we are running out of time. I just want to thank Jim for sitting down with us. It was an absolute pleasure. Jim, is there anything new on the horizons for you?
New on the horizon for us? No, taking our projects and one project at a time. We're hoping to expand our practice through one or two acquisitions in the next year or two. It's exciting times in our industry, as with a lot of industries, because there are a lot of small businesses out there started by baby boomers 20, 30 years ago, and now those baby boomers are looking to retire and sell. So there's just like there's consolidation with, big companies. There's consolidations with smaller and different types of firms like ours. So, but we're, like I said before, it's always a challenge. We're always tracking new regulations, always tracking new policies, keeping our clients abreast of new developments, and hopefully helping them with their projects, and helping their bottom line.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim. It was an absolute pleasure. I am definitely looking forward to connecting with you again, again in the future. We definitely need to grab a cup of coffee and really just have a sit down and just talk about talk about some business and everything. I just want to thank you. I left your Instagram on the bottom for my audience to connect you with. Is there anything else you would like to add on?
That's it. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be on your show. It was great.
Awesome, guys. Be sure to stay tuned. I will be announcing the next guest soon. That decision is still being still in the works right now, but we will definitely get that together for you real soon. It was a pleasure once again. Everyone, hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay productive. It is a Tuesday, so definitely work. Definitely get that money. Have a good one, guys.